Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Aquinas Center's Catholic-Orthodox Lecture. Before we begin tonight, we would like to take a few moments to recognize our dear friend and colleague, Dr. Gregory Hillis. Dr. Hillis served as the executive director of the Aquinas Center for a little over a year and sadly passed away on October the 8th. Tonight's lecture is dedicated in his loving memory. Please know the decision to continue with tonight's lecture was not an easy one, as we are an organization in mourning. But the reality is that Greg was extremely excited about tonight's talk, and he was overjoyed to bring Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost to Candler. If you knew Greg, you knew his dedication and his passion for teaching diaconate formation. And he was moved by Dr. Frederick Frost's scholarship on women and the diaconate in the Orthodox Church. But he also thought that her work had interesting corollaries for the Roman Catholic Church to consider. I know Greg would be heartbroken if tonight's lecture was canceled. So, in loving memory of our colleague, our friend, and our brother in Christ, Dr. Gregory Hillis, let's please take a moment of silent prayer as we begin. And I also ask that we hold in prayer Greg's wife, Kim, and his three sons, Isaac, Sam, and Leo. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all so much. Again, welcome to tonight's Catholic-Orthodox Lecture entitled, Fill Her with All Faith, Love, Power, and Holiness, Restoring the Office of the Deaconess in the Orthodox Church with Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost. Tonight's lecture is brought to you by the Aquinas Center's Catholic-Orthodox Initiative. My name is Alice Cameron, and I'm the Director of Operations at the Aquinas Center. The Aquinas Center at Emory University is a Catholic thought center that provides community programming, inviting ecumenical conversations and dialogue while fostering faith. In 2017, the Aquinas Center began its Catholic-Orthodox initiative, thanks to an endowment from Solon and Mariana Patterson, who are here this evening. The work and programs of the Catholic-Orthodox Initiative, which include tonight's annual lecture series, focus on providing a greater understanding of our faith traditions rooted in our shared history. And it strives to build community and deepen relationships amongst Catholics and Orthodox. It is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost is an Orthodox Christian theologian and the Assistant Professor of Religion and Culture at Western Washington University. Among her publications is her recent book on women in the Orthodox Church, Church of Our Granddaughters. She is book reviews editor for the Journal of Orthodox Christian Studies, co-chair of the Women and the Church group of the International Orthodox Theological Association, and chair of St. Phoebe Center of the Deaconesses. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost as she presents Fill Her with All Faith, Love, Power, and Holiness, Restoring the Office of the Deaconesses in the Orthodox Church.
Good evening. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for being here tonight in person and online. Just informally to tell you a little bit more about myself before I start my talk, I grew up in the Orthodox Church. My father's family immigrated to the United States, and I grew up in a Carpatho-Russian parish in the hills of West Virginia. And I was a question asker as a child, and I had a lot of questions about women in the church, about why I saw so many women there in the pews or standing, but no women back in the sanctuary behind the altar. And fortunately for me, I grew up in a family and in a community that allowed me to ask those questions. And that's really what has led me to be here today giving this lecture. I remember asking a parish priest about women in the church, and he showed me an icon of St. Phoebe that the Orthodox Church understands to be the first deaconess. And he told me the church historically had this role of deaconesses, and maybe it will again someday. And sometimes I wonder what wheels he set in motion. Did he have any idea what the wheels he set in motion? So to formally begin, I would like to dedicate my talk as well to the memory of Greg Hillis, a colleague and a friend of my husband's, who extended the invitation for me to come to Emory for this lecture, but is no longer with us. May his memory be eternal. Earlier this year, I witnessed history. I traveled to Zimbabwe to observe and celebrate the first ordination of an Orthodox Christian deaconess in the 21st century. On Orthodox Holy Thursday, May 2nd, 2024, Angelic Molen was ordained to the diaconate in Harare, Zimbabwe. The Orthodox Church in Zimbabwe is part of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Alexandria and of all Africa, which is the autocephalous or self-headed Orthodox Church in the continent of Africa. With the approval and support of the Alexandrian Synod and his beatitude Patriarch Theodoros, who is the head bishop in Africa, His Eminence Metropolitan Seraphim of Zimbabwe, the local bishop in Zimbabwe, laid hands on Deaconess Angelic in St. Nectarios Mission Parish at Waterfall. It was my blessing and my honor to witness and celebrate the ordination along with my oldest daughter, Annie, and to join in the shouts of Oxia, she is worthy, or Akaruzuzera, the Shona, for she is worthy. This ordination was not only of enormous significance to me personally, but of an enormous significance to the Orthodox Church, and perhaps to the Catholic Church as well. The significance and implications of the ordination of Deaconess Angelic for the Orthodox and Catholic churches are the focus of my talk this evening. This evening, I'd like to first give you a sense of the history of deaconesses and the current and ongoing conversation about the ordained order of deaconess in the Orthodox Church around the world. Then speak to the process of renewing the Orthodox order of deaconess that is taking place in Africa. Tell you more about the ordination of Deaconess Angelic herself. Address the significance of Deaconess Angelic's ordination for other Orthodox churches, and then speculate with you about the possible implications for the Roman Catholic Church resulting from Deaconess Angelic's ordination. So first, let me describe the conversation about deaconesses in the Orthodox Church. The ordination of Deaconess Angelic was the culmination of worldwide efforts to renew the ancient order of deaconess in the Orthodox Church, bolstered by specific efforts within the Alexandrian Patriarchate. Note that this office is being renewed. This is not an innovation on the part of the Orthodox Church, but a return to the ordained order from the Church's history. Ample evidence testifies to the deaconess in the ancient world, including scripture, canon law, correspondence, archaeological evidence, and ordination rites. As ecclesiology developed in the Christian East, the roles of three ordained orders settled over time. The episcopate, meaning the bishops, was the figure of unity and the defender of doctrine. The presbytery, the priests, was the local celebrant of the sacraments. And the diaconate, meaning deacons and deaconesses, was the order of diaconia, of service. Some roles of deaconesses and deacons were gendered, as was nearly anything in the ancient world, such as deaconesses helping with women's baptism and bringing the Eucharist to women at home. But some roles were not gendered, including overseeing the philanthropic efforts of the church and ministering to the poor and needy. The office of deaconess in the Christian East fell out of use in the late Byzantine era for a variety of reasons, as did the office of deacon, which subsequently over recent centuries has become, in most cases, little more than a liturgical assistant in the Orthodox Church. For the past century, various parts and peoples of the Orthodox world have advocated for the renewal of the ordained order of deaconess, including discussion in the 1917-1918 Council of the Russian Orthodox Church, the late 20th century meetings convened by the World Council of Churches, and the notable Pan-Orthodox consultation in Rhodes, Greece, attended by most of the Orthodox churches in the world in 1988, which stated the following, quote, "The apostolic order of deaconess should be revived. Such a revival would represent a positive response to many of the needs and demands of the contemporary world in many spheres." These church-sanctioned calls inspired the founding of the US nonprofit, the St. Phoebe Center for the Deaconess, which I currently chair. It was founded in 2013, and its mission is to educate about the historic deaconess and advocate for the renewal of the order today. Since the founding of the St. Phoebe Center, calls for renewing the order of deaconess in the Orthodox context have just continued. The seminal social ethos document released by the Ecumenical Patriarchate in 2020, called For the Life of the World Toward a Social Ethos of the Orthodox Church, states the following, quote, "The Church must continue to consider how women can best participate in building up the body of Christ, including a renewal of the order of the female diaconate for today," end quote. There's a common theme throughout these calls to renew the order of deaconess. The Orthodox Church needs women serving in this capacity to best live out its mission. The ancient order of the diaconate was a service ministry of the church, involved in the care of local Christians in the larger community. Both deacons and deaconesses assisted with the philanthropic work of the church, while other roles, as I said, were segregated by gender. Deacons took communion to the sick and homebound men. Deaconesses did the same for women, and so on. Both deacons and deaconesses had liturgical roles, though different from each other. The current movement to ordain deaconesses focuses on the need for women to be vetted, trained, supported, and given the authority of the Orthodox Church to minister in a diaconal spirit. Now let us turn our attention to the movement to ordain women as deaconesses in Africa specifically. The answer to these many calls and this need to renew the order of deaconess is coming first from the Orthodox Church in Africa. And before I describe the particulars, let me pause here and just make a few comments on the structure of the Orthodox Church. So rather than one ecclesiological structure with a head bishop at the top, the Orthodox Church is composed of autocephalous or self-governing churches, which are usually structured in line with political and geographical boundaries. For example, there's an autocephalous Church of Serbia, an Orthodox Church of Romania, an Orthodox Church of Russia, and so on. Depending on who you ask, there are 14, 15, or 16 of these self-governed churches in the world. And I say depending on who you ask because there are disagreements among the different autocephalous churches regarding how a church becomes autocephalous. And thus the true autocephaly of two churches is questioned by some of the others. At any rate, one of the oldest autocephalous churches in the Eastern Orthodox Church is the Church of Alexandria, the Orthodox Church in the continent of Africa. In 2016, the Holy Synod of this church, the Holy Synod of Alexandria, the governing body of bishops in the Orthodox Church in Africa, unanimously voted to begin the process to restore the order of deaconess. Partly motivated by the affirmation and documents from the Holy and Great Council of Crete of 2016, which affirmed the ability of autocephalous Orthodox churches, such as the Alexandrian Patriarchate, to minister to local needs. This is an important point because this office of deaconess is part of the Orthodox tradition, never been banned, and it's not a doctrinal issue, but instead a pastoral one. It is well within the purview of a local or autocephalous Orthodox church to ordain deaconesses based on the needs of the local people. Initially, and under threat of financial consequences for the Alexandrian Orthodox Church in Africa, several women were consecrated deaconesses, not ordained, by Patriarch Theodoros in Democratic Republic of Congo in 2017 and elsewhere. It's well known that Patriarch Theodorus initially intended to ordain these women, but the Alexandrian Church received explicit threats that funding from certain Greek sources would be cut off if ordinations took place. These threats were meaningful because the African Church is not financially independent. So instead, the Patriarch compromised by consecrating these women. Even though they were called deaconesses, the role they were given was more like a subdeaconess or a member of the minor orders. Now, earlier this year in 2024, Deaconess Angelica, in contrast, was ordained. And her ordination took place with the explicit blessing of Patriarch Theodorus and with the full support of her local parish, St. Nectarios Mission, and its clergy and its faithful, with the faith and confidence of her bishop, Metropolitan Seraphim. Deaconess Angelica's ordination will likely prompt the clergy in Africa to consider standardizing and vetting the training of future deaconesses. There are already plans being formed to ordain other women to the diaconate in Africa. And I wait with interest and curiosity to see what develops in Africa the next few months. Let me tell you more now about the ordination of Deaconess Angelica herself. Deaconess Angelica is a respected, central, and beloved member of the Orthodox community of St. Nectarios Mission Parish, and she's been doing diaconal ministry for over a decade prior to her ordination. Since she was a teenager, she's been deeply involved in the pastoral care of the people of St. Nectarios. She oversees many initiatives, including organizing and maintaining a chicken raising program that provides chickens and eggs for members of the community in need, overseeing and teaching catechesis, organizing mothers groups, and representing the Zimbabwean Orthodox Church at ecological and ecumenical events, including the World Council of Churches and Faith Leaders Environmental Advocacy Training. She's working towards a degree in geography and environmental studies at the University of Zimbabwe. Prior to the ordination, she went through a training and preparation process with formal prayers and instruction from Metropolitan Seraphim. Most Orthodox deacons, it should be noted, receive formal seminary training, but there's no Orthodox seminary in Africa that accepts women. So Deaconess Angelica was therefore privately instructed. Her ordination took place, as I said, on May 2nd, earlier this year. Her parish, St. Nectarios, is a growing parish of more than 200 souls, more of half of which are children. The parish property includes a church, school, church office and kitchen, and ample playground equipment and room for the children. Men, women, and children attended the ordination, but fewer men because the morning service conflicted with the workday. The service began with the choir in front of the church alongside the reader's stand. Throughout the service, I observed little children trickling up to the front to lean on and hold hands with their mothers who were in the choir. The children throughout the church laughed, keened, sang, and shuffled throughout the service. These are the mellifluous noises of a vibrant parish. Both altar boys and altar girls served that morning. Just before the Divine Liturgy on this day, May 2nd, Metropolitan Seraphim tonsured Deaconess Angelica as a reader and a subdeaconess, immediately after which the ordination took place, as ordinations do, during the liturgy at the altar. The ordination service was the rite used for deacons from the contemporary service book of the Holy Orthodox Catholic Apostolic Church, published by the Antiochian Orthodox Christian Archdiocese of North America in 1983, based on the Isabel Florence Hapgood translation from 1906 of mostly Church Slavonic sources. This English service book is widely used across Orthodox jurisdictions in the United States. Now, the detail of which rite was used and which year it was translated and so forth really might seem insignificant, but it was in fact very significant, and that's why I belabor the point here. Metropolitan Seraphim could have used an extant rite for the ordination of deaconesses from the ancient world. For example, the Barberini Codex from the 8th century. But the Metropolitan instead chose to use the more contemporary rite because this is the rite used for deacons today. For him, this was the natural choice. The only changes made were masculine pronouns changed to feminine, and an addition of a reference to Saint Phoebe, the woman I mentioned earlier in St. Paul's letter to the Romans, that the church understands to be the prototype for the office of deaconess, rather than the reference to Saint Stephen, the first century saint venerated as the church's first deacon. By using this particular ordination rite for a deacon, Metropolitan Seraphim made clear that deacons and deaconesses today will share the same office. And this was witnessed during the Divine Liturgy on May 2nd. Deaconess Angelic read petitions, she read the gospel, she distributed communion to the faithful, to men, women, and children, all liturgical roles shared with the deacon. In fact, she participated in these liturgical actions alongside her own brother, who was the recently ordained Deacon Spiridon. Deaconess Angelic wore the same vestments as a deacon, modified to fit her smaller frame. At the end of the Divine Liturgy, Metropolitan Seraphim spoke to the importance of Deaconess Angelic's ministry and stressed that she must be an upright example for all, living life in the light of Christ. He invited everyone to come forward and congratulate the new deaconess. The sense of contained excitement that had been growing throughout the ordination just burst forth at this point. The women of St. Nectarios sang, danced, clapped, ululated, while everyone swarmed Deaconess Angelic with affection and pride and affirmation. And I will never forget the kind of unalloyed and collective jubilation of that moment. Because Deaconess Angelic is the first deaconess of our own time, Metropolitan Seraphim elevated her to the rank of Archdeaconess a few days later on May 4th. Using the relevant prayers, and again, the service book of the Holy Orthodox Catholic Apostolic Church, the same service used for the ordination. She was given the name Phoebe in honor of the first century saint, and thus her official title is Archdeaconess Angelic Phoebe. But it seems that she will be called the more easily spoken Deaconess Phoebe or Sister Phoebe. After the prayers for her, Deaconess Angelic or Sister Angelic. After the prayers for her elevation, she assisted Metropolitan Seraphim with the baptism of parish children, a traditional role of the ancient world deaconess. The significance of the location and the day were clear. The church in which the ordination took place is named after 20th century Saint Nectarios of Aina, Greece, who ordained 2 nuns as deaconesses in the early 20th century. Probably the most recent ordinations in time to her, to Deaconess Angelic. And Metropolitan Seraphim said that this was an important example for him. The Divine Liturgy on Holy Thursday, the day of the ordination, commemorates the institution of the Holy Eucharist. Holy Thursday is also the day of 2 consecrations, of chrism, the oil used for the sacrament of chrismation of new members of the Orthodox Church, and of the reserved sacrament, the Eucharist set aside for communing the sick or the homebound throughout the year. With these connections, the ordination of Deaconess Angelic on Holy Thursday underscores the integral sacramental and Eucharistic work of the diaconate. Perhaps there will someday be a festal commemoration of this event, just as the Orthodox commemorate the restoration of icons each year on the first Sunday of Great Lent. Perhaps a day will be designated to commemorate the restoration of the office of deaconess. Other important precedents were set with the ordination of Deaconess Angelic. She's 33 years old. She's married. She has 2 children. Deaconesses in the ancient world were generally, but not always, unmarried and older. Some canons state deaconesses ought to be older than 40, or in some cases 60 years. These and other canons relating to the age of ordination have always been understood as guidelines. The canons also state that men should be at least 30 to be ordained as priests, though examples abound of much younger priests. When asked about this issue of age, Metropolitan Seraphim stressed the ordination is less about the letter of the law and more about the spirit. Deaconess Angelic already has a diaconal ministry and is deemed spiritually prepared and well-suited for ordination, so it simply made sense for the church to ordain her now rather than waiting for her to turn 40. This detail is important because there are those who wish to see deaconesses in the Orthodox Church, but believe they should only be older women and possibly only monastic women. Many of the women doing similar diaconal work across the world are also younger and also have families. The Metropolitan's thinking is that it makes good sense to ordain these women rather than wait for an age that might have been suitable in the ancient world, but today is arbitrary. As noted, Deaconess Angelic was ordained with the same prayers on the books as for a deacon, and she's already serving liturgically in the same capacity as her male counterparts. Even as this is the case, there's no erasure of gender going on. And Metropolitan Seraphim and Deaconess Angelic explicitly wanted me to convey this to people that I speak to. It is very much expected that Deaconess Angelic will bring her feminine perspectives and gifts to this ministry, and it should be noted that Zimbabwean culture is highly gender-bound. Her dignity as a woman is being honored through ordination, not compromised. So I'm reminded of a story that was recently told to me about the addition of women to the police force in the United Kingdom. Bear with me, this does actually relate. Apparently, when police women were allowed at the first time to answer the same calls as men, it became quickly clear that women were more effective than men in certain situations. Police women were better able to, for example, diffuse domestic violence, which produced better outcomes for all involved. Now it is internationally considered a best practice to, when possible, send a policewoman on domestic violence calls. The fact that women had the special ability to assist with domestic violence only became clear when policewomen were given the same job as men. In the case of Deaconess Angelic, she will have the same liturgical roles as a deacon, but her pastoral ministry, which is deeply tied to her liturgical role, will certainly play out differently because she is a woman. Deaconess Angelic will naturally continue the ministries in which she's already engaged, catechesis, chicken raising, and so forth, and she will also continue in her ministry of improving the environment and will oversee ecological initiatives for the network of parishes in Zimbabwe. She said to me, "The earth is a sacred gift from God. We must protect it from harm and live in harmony with the plants, animals, and every living thing." Deaconess Angelic will continue these projects now with the support and the authority of the church and the sacramental connections that will allow her to more fully live out her diaconia, her service. So I'll speak now to the significance of Deaconess Angelic's ordination for the rest of the Orthodox world. I don't think that the significance of this ordination for the Orthodox world can be overstated. The other autocephalous Orthodox churches around the world now have a contemporary precedent. Not only was a deaconess ordained, but the process happened in an impeccable manner, with the approval of the synod and the patriarch, with the hands laid on by an esteemed metropolitan, and with the love and the support of her community. The ordination of Deaconess Angelic offers a sound example of good church order for other bishops in Africa to emulate, as well as for other Orthodox synods around the world to consider. This is very important for a community that values church order. Other details of the ordination establish important precedents. As noted, Deaconess Angelic is young, married, and has children, thus paving the way for other women similarly situated in life to be eligible for ordination. Deaconess Angelic has all the liturgical roles of a deacon, establishing precedent for the contemporary expression of the diaconate mirrored between men and women, rather than women having a more circumscribed liturgical and ministerial role, as was often the case in the ancient world. As I noted earlier, I'm told that there are hopes to ordain more women in Africa in the near future, but will other Orthodox churches in other parts of the world follow suit? That's certainly my hope, and I applaud the Alexandrian Synod and Metropolitan Seraphim for their courage in blazing the trail. Courage was necessary, let's be clear, because going first involves an enormous amount of scrutiny. Predictably, the naysayers have been apoplectic. It's striking to me that these people, from what I can tell, mostly American men, many of them recent converts to Orthodoxy, feel comfortable quickly condemning the actions of a church a world away from theirs, different in race, culture, and socioeconomic status. Complicating the factor is that the Russian Orthodox Church's recent incursion into Africa. The Patriarchate of Alexandria is, along with the Coptic Church, the ancient Orthodox Christian presence in Africa from the beginning, attributing its origins to St. Mark and claiming the 4th century Nicene apologist St. Athanasios as its patron. And yet the contemporary Russian church has entered Africa just in the last few years. This is very recent, luring priests and parishes from the Alexandrian church with financial incentives, solidifying the world's perception of the Russian church as heedlessly fractious and self-serving. Russian Orthodox Church figures in Africa have criticized the ordination of Deaconess Angelic, which only deepens the division between the Russian Orthodox Church and the rest of the Orthodox world, to the satisfaction of some Russian ecclesia and governmental authorities. Speaking of fractiousness and division in the Orthodox Church today, a common refrain for many years now, even among bishops who might otherwise support the ordination of deaconesses, is this: we must preserve the unity of the church, and ordaining deaconesses might fracture our community, therefore we cannot risk it. But as the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church, Elpidophoros, observed only last week, it's been 6 months since Deaconess Angelic's ordination, and somehow the church is still standing. I, as you may tell, am unconvinced by this refrain about unity, this fear about unity from the Orthodox hierarchy. I'm unconvinced that the Orthodox Church hierarchy really cares about internal unity. I'm unconvinced that questions of unity should be the measure for whether to ordain deaconesses today or not. For me, there's little to no evidence that church unity is actually the concern of our hierarchy. In fact, I think the evidence supports the opposite conclusion, that church unity is absolutely not a priority for Orthodox hierarchs today. The Orthodox Church could not convene a full council of autocephalous churches in 2016, despite nearly a century of planning. At the last minute, several autocephalous churches declined to attend. In 2019, the Ecumenical Patriarchate granted autocephaly to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, despite questions of its authority to do so. And the Russian Orthodox Church in turn broke communion with the Ecumenical Patriarchate and later aligned itself with the Russian government's invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church is one of the 2 churches I mentioned earlier that are not fully recognized as autocephalous churches by all the pre-existing autocephalous churches. In recent years, just to add to my laundry list here, the effort to unify the utter mess of Orthodox jurisdictions in the United States has come to a standstill, despite a late 20th century moment of optimism in which the Orthodox Church in America was granted autocephaly by the Russian Orthodox Church in hopes that it would lead the way to jurisdictional unity in America. The Orthodox Church in America is the second of the 2 I mentioned earlier that are not fully recognized as autocephalous churches. All the while, many of the faithful, especially young women, are abandoning the Orthodox Church because of its lamentable dearth of roles for women. But this phenomena, which some have called a silent schism, is largely ignored by the hierarchy, while it continues to point to the red herring of future theoretical unity. Clearly, church unity is not a concern, not a central concern to the Orthodox hierarchy. Those who cite concerns about unity and their criticism of the ordination in Africa are really concerned about and fearful of change, even restorative change. Now, the Orthodox Church community has always been slow to change. In some ways, this is an asset, truly. In some ways, it is. It's not a reactive community. But in the Orthodox world, stasis for the sake of stasis has become an idol. It's become a false god. I stress this point about unity because it's an interesting place of comparison, I believe, between the 2 churches. The Orthodox Church's composition of autocephalases, again, 14, 15, 16, rather than one unified hierarchy makes things messier. Perhaps easier, on the one hand, to make the case for local need, in this case for deaconesses, but also easier for fear-mongering about division, because division among autocephalous churches is quite possible in this loose structure of autocephalous churches. The Catholic Church, on the other hand, does not have the same threat of interior division because of its unified governing structure. On the other hand, this unified governing structure perhaps makes it harder to make an argument for change, since typically change has to be universal. Even if the Orthodox world did demonstrate a serious commitment to unity, coming back to this point, I don't actually think that unity should be given primacy in church decision-making. Primacy should be given to how to best live out the church's mission of service for all, both inside and outside the church walls. One way to better live out our mission is to fully restore this order of the diaconate for both men and women, since the central concern of this order is service and transfiguration. This, I believe, is another fruitful point of comparison with the Catholic setting, because this emphasis on service and transfiguration is at the center of both churches' conversations about deaconesses. When asked about the precedent set for other Orthodox churches, Metropolitan Seraphim, the bishop again who laid hands on Deaconess Angelic, said he understands the return of the order of deaconess to other parts of the Orthodox Church as inevitable. It's just a matter of time. He remarked, "The revival of the apostolic tradition of the institution of deaconess in the missionary ministry of our church, no one can stop it because it has as its source the Holy Spirit who healed the sick and found the missing." I will now offer some speculative thoughts on how the ordination of Deaconess Angelic and the movement in the Orthodox Church to have deaconesses again might have implications for the Roman Catholic Church. I have to confess, when I begin to speculate about what Orthodox bishops might or might do in terms of next ordaining deaconesses, I know I'm on thin ice. The thinking and decisions of the Orthodox hierarchy are rarely apparent or really transparent to the Orthodox laity. But perhaps the fact that I've been on the ice for so long now gives me the audacity to speculate about the Catholic Church, the operations of which are even more opaque to me. There are some ecclesiological differences in the Catholic context compared to the Orthodox when it comes to the diaconate, notably the roles. There's some differences about theology of ordination and the theology of the three major orders. But even with these ecclesial differences, there are many parallels between the Orthodox and Catholic conversations around deaconesses that make a comparison fruitful. The testimony of history is strong, both East and West. The diaconate as a whole fell largely out of use in both East and West in the Middle Ages. And the conversation about a possible renewal of the order for women deacons began in earnest in the mid-20th century in both communities. In the Catholic context, renewed interest surfaced during the Second Vatican Council, which voted to renew the ancient ministry of permanent deacons, meaning only men. In the following decades, a conversation around women's ordination took place in the Catholic Church, and multiple statements from the Vatican explicitly ruled out ordaining women as priests, but did not rule out, also did not address women's ordination to the diaconate. There was a sense of possibility around women's ordination to the diaconate, encouraged by 3 iterations of the International Theological Commission and 2 pontifical commissions under Pope Francis. Reports from these commissions have not been made public, but supporters of the renewal of the diaconate in the Catholic context garner hope from such commission statements as this one. With regard to the ordination of women to the diaconate, it pertains to the ministry of discernment, which the Lord established in his church to pronounce authoritatively on this question, end quote. The conversation about deaconesses is growing also in the Catholic context, exemplified by the founding of the nonprofit organization Discerning Deacons, the mission of which is to engage Catholics in the active discernment of our church about women in the diaconate. In addition to the papal commissions, Pope Francis has consistently led a movement for the Catholic Church, as you know, to become more collaborative in its decision and discernment. Starting in 2021, Catholics around the world could share their perspectives through local consultations that culminated in 2 synods at the Vatican, one last year and one happening right now. The second session of the Synod on Synodality is going on in Rome at this moment. Almost all of the synodal reports from around the world, brought in from Catholic lay people and clergy, raised concern that women are not valued or involved in decision-making to the extent that they ought to be or should be. Women deacons in particular have been a major topic of discussion throughout the synodal process. Now, Pope Francis's repeated calls for a collaborative church and a listening church seemed out of step to some with remarks he made during an American television interview earlier this year when he was asked, "For a little girl growing up in Catholic today, will she ever have the opportunity to be a deacon and participate as a clergy member in the church?" Pope Francis memorably said no. Clearly, this was, people are quick to point out, an off-the-cuff answer in an informal interview, not a papal statement, not a decree, but it made Catholics who advocate for deaconesses wonder about their leaders' commitment to listening. One Catholic organization, Voice of the Faithful, responded this way: "We will keep walking on the synodal path Pope Francis inaugurated and pray that he fulfills his own promise to listen." Advocates for women deacons are optimistic that the promise to listen will be ultimately fulfilled. When Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez announced on the behalf of the study group 5, the Synod study group responsible for questions related to ministry, including women deacons, that it will expand its consultative phase to include women who did not serve as consultors to the dicastery in charge of the study group. He said this on October 9th, that in addition to receiving input from all the dicastery's appointed consultors, the dicastery will consult other women as well as receive input from participants in the Synod of Bishops. It was not specified who the outside women consultors are. So thus stands the conversation in the Catholic setting. So far as I know, there could be news from today that I literally haven't heard because, as I said, this is happening in Rome at this very moment. But my question now is, might the recent Orthodox ordination in Zimbabwe influence the Catholic conversation? So years ago, a colleague asked me this question in reference to the parallel movements in both these churches to ordain women to the diaconate. She said, "Who do you think will go first, the Catholics or the Orthodox?" But bound up with that question, I think, is another question, which is, would the ordination of deaconesses in one apostolic lung of the church make it easier for it to happen in the other? Again, there's enough in common across our traditions to make this question meaningful. And there's one commonality that I really want to highlight because I think it's so important. In both of these churches, the advocacy for deaconesses is not only based on historical evidence, but it's also based on pastoral need. Now, the historical precedent is very important. Let's face it, both of our communities are enamored with our long legacy and our history that makes the ordination of deaconesses today not an innovation, like I said earlier, but a revival. However, our history informs us, it doesn't determine us. So the diaconate of today should serve the needs of today. As far as I can tell, I do think it's helpful for the Catholic move towards deaconesses for the Orthodox Church to have gone first. There's broad interest in the Catholic Church in looking to its Eastern Orthodox sibling for example, precedent, and inspiration. One example for you, I was invited to Rome 2 years ago to speak at a Catholic conference, the theme of which was listening to the East, synodality in Eastern Orthodox Church traditions. I say this because I want to point out that as the Orthodox Church prepared for the Holy and Great Council of 2016 that I mentioned earlier, there was no, which I think the council itself was approximately comparable in significance to the Synod of Synodality, but there was no listening to the West conference that took place. There's a strong spirit of triumphalism in the Orthodox Church today that often blinds us to looking or listening to our Catholic brothers and sisters, and we are the poorer for that. The return to the historical order of deaconess as an ordained order in the Orthodox Church, I think, may be significant to the Catholics. As I noted earlier, women were first consecrated as deaconesses in Africa, which places them in a position of the minor orders, like a subdeaconess. But now Deaconess Angelic was ordained in accordance with the historical precedent of the order. There's some talk in the Catholic Church about creating a new role for women deacons that would be analogous to the subdiaconate. And the thinking here is to preserve the unicity of the three major orders. Perhaps the Orthodox precedent of ordination will put the Catholic argument for ordination on firmer footing. The irony here, of course, in both cases is very powerful. These two traditions, which profess so much allegiance to history and precedent, entertaining the idea of inventing a new order so as to avoid women taking their rightful historical place among the major orders. It's ironic. Another bit of evidence that the ordination that took place in Zimbabwe bolsters the Catholic case is the fact that members of the Catholic press and Catholic scholars were more interested in covering the ordination of Deaconess Angelic than Orthodox. I received many requests from interviews, pictures, quotations from Catholic organizations, again, press and scholars, comparatively few from Orthodox. I suspect that part of the lower interest from the Orthodox world is that this ordination took place in the Alexandrian Church of Africa, which sadly and inexcusably is easily dismissed by the rest of the Orthodox world. When an Orthodox ordination takes place in Romania or Finland or the United States, I think the Orthodox attention will be captured then. Now, if the Catholics had gone first, what would it have meant for the Orthodox Church? I speculate, and this is all speculation, that it may not have been as helpful. Part of Orthodox triumphalism is a sense of superiority to our Catholic friends and a skepticism at best and a condemnation at worst of all things Western, including the Catholic Church. If Catholics had gone first, those triumphalists would have attempted to dismiss the Orthodox push for deaconesses as another example of Western captivity. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that these triumphalists have all that much influence, actually, in the Orthodox Church. It seems to me that theirs is an echo chamber. Much could be said here, such as the way that those who level this charge seem to be unaware of how their own ideas of orthodoxy have been influenced by American political ideology, which is probably the most exaggerated form of Western captivity, but I'll leave it at that. My point is that even if it had not hurt the Orthodox movement for deaconesses, I doubt that it would have helped the Orthodox case if the Catholics had gone first. I'll now make some concluding remarks. So I noted earlier that a commonality across the two movements for deaconesses, the argument being made by Orthodox and Catholics alike, is the pastoral need for deaconesses today. In both movements, the emphasis is that the church needs a fully realized diaconate of women and men, that we need this order dedicated to service because it's so essential to our whole church's mission of service and transfiguration. Karl Rahner once said, "In the future, the church will either become diaconal or will cease to exist." In the future, the church will either become diaconal or will cease to exist. He knew that a fully realized diaconate is essential to our churches, realizing their mission in the world. And if we lose sight of our core mission of diaconia, we lose the church. The title of this talk comes from the Byzantine rite of ordination of a deaconess. In that rite, we pray for the deaconess, quote, "Fill her with all faith, love, power, and holiness." This is what we hope to see in the church, women who are vetted and trained, ordained to the diaconate, and thus given the support and authority to strengthen the church's diaconal mission. I believe that many of us share this prayer, East and West. Perhaps, as both apostolic churches move towards deaconesses, there will be new possibilities of unity between our churches through this expression of our shared mission. Imagine a world in which both the Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches have an active diaconate which reaches out into the world with the church's mission of love and service. I believe this would bring the Orthodox churches closer to each other and closer to our Catholic sisters and brothers. The evening after the ordination of Deaconess Angelic, my daughter Annie and I, our faces hurting from smiling all day, we struggled to put into words our thoughts and feelings. We talked about hearing Deaconess Angelic read the gospel and watching her distribute the Eucharist. Neither of us, both having grown up in the Orthodox Church, had ever heard a woman read the gospel in a church. We'd never seen a woman distribute communion. We had never seen a woman minister in a diaconal capacity acknowledged by the church, filled with faith, love, power, and holiness. Annie said that there was a sense of something that had been missing falling into place at just that moment. And we agreed that we were, for the first time, witnessing the church in its fullness. There was a way it felt just natural and right. And it's my prayer that this fullness will soon come to fruition in both lungs of the Apostolic Church. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That was just incredible. And you gave us a lot of inspiration from Deaconess Angelic and her story and just what it could mean for the Catholic Church. So thank you so much. So at this time, we're going to open it up to questions. And if you have a question for a speaker, we ask, if you're in person today, we ask that you use the microphone and podium over there. And so that way you can be captured online. And then I'll be monitoring the questions from our online audience.
Thank you so much for a terrific presentation. You mentioned that Deaconess Angelic was married prior to ordination. Is the protocol similar to Orthodox clergy, where you can be married prior to ordination but not after?
Correct.
So everything is consistent.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do the deaconesses preach?
They may. Not all deacons in the Orthodox Church preach.
Okay.
So one assumes that as this order is renewed, some will. There are also some Orthodox women who preach who are not deaconesses but have been given a blessing by their bishop to do so. Not common.
Hi, I'm Father Bill Ortega of the Anglican Church in North America, formerly Episcopal, and I was really impressed by your presentation. And the Orthodox Church seemed to do it the opposite the way the Episcopal Church, which was a catastrophe, because in the Episcopal Church they just went on with the ordination of deaconesses and then women to the priesthood, in contradiction to the worldwide Anglican Church, and eventually it led to the division. And I'm a reflection of that. We said enough of this and had to leave and form the Anglican Church. So I commend the Orthodox Church going slow. I would pray they go a little faster. And if you want to see some good Anglican deaconesses, there are plenty around, and I found them very impressive, and go to an Anglican service once in a while.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think that brings up an important point too, is that, as I said, to have deaconesses in the church today would be a type of restoration. It would be a renewal, a revival of a pre-existing office. To even entertain the idea of priests or bishops is an entire innovation. It's not part of our tradition. And some of us were talking at dinner about this. The Orthodox Church has not even begun in any substantial way a process of even beginning to think about that possibility.
As a point of interest, it may interest you later to do further research on this. In the Anglican Church of North America, which is orthodox in theology and et cetera, some dioceses have ordained women as priests, and other dioceses say, no, that's going too far. And I imagine it would be a century before the Orthodox Church ever ordained a woman as a priest, if ever. But anyway, it's interesting what happened in the Anglican Church in North America, that the Archbishop says, and he was against women priesthood, but he was very for women deacons, that if a woman is ordained to the priesthood, let's say in the Diocese of the Northwest, if she comes to Atlanta, which is the Diocese of the South, she may function as a deacon, but not as a priest. And so it's an interesting, and that the issue did not divide us among the Anglican Church in North America. And it's just we.
Right, there's a question of how you receive clergy in different locations.
Right, that could be something that the Orthodox Church eventually does. Some
Well,
dioceses accept women or deaconess and others not.
Well, I think it will be interesting when Deaconess Angelic comes to the United States, which I hope she will sometime in the next couple of years, to see if she's received as a deaconess.
In other words, it doesn't have to be all that every single diocese, for instance, in the American Orthodox Church, accept a woman deacon. Some would be more conservative, but she could operate in certain.
Oh, I'm sorry. We also have a question online for you. So he says, thank you for a fabulous talk. I am wondering whether the financial pressures from Greece, which have stopped the ordination in the Republic of Congo years earlier, have subsided before this ordination. And if so, does this signify that the Greek Orthodox Church may be open to follow suit?
Well, a couple of things there. One is that interestingly, in the 1980s, the Greek Orthodox Church did go through a process of deciding to have deaconesses in the church today. There was one particular archbishop who kind of led that charge, and he passed away in a very untimely manner, and it just never got legs. So the Greek Church historically, I say this to just demonstrate that the Greek Church historically has been open to having deaconesses, and maybe that will come about. We'll see what happens. And I want to be clear that it wasn't the official Greek Church that was threatening financial consequences for the Orthodox Church in Africa. It was some Greek Orthodox people and institutions. Okay, just to be clear, it wasn't the church itself as a governing body. What was the first part of that question? Sorry, Alice. Yeah.
The first part is just wondering whether the financial pressures from Greece, which have stopped the ordination in the Republic of Congo years earlier, have subsided before.
So my impression from talking to Metropolitan Seraphim and other clergy in Africa is that the financial situation has not changed. If anything else, it's gotten worse because of this Russian incursion into the continent of Africa and the financial incentives that the Russian Orthodox Church is offering priests and parishioners to join. So I think the financial pressure has gotten worse, but I think the real need to have women, again, who are given the support and the authority of the church has also increased. And so I think from talking to Metropolitan Seraphim, there's become a willingness to take this risk because the pastoral need is so enormous and so clear, and that the financial picture kind of pales in comparison to that real need.
Thank you. We have a second question. Is the blessing of women preachers an installed ministry? Are these women allowed to preach the homily during Mass?
We don't operate with quite the same language. And again, this is, an attribute of Orthodoxy, of our just sort of messier, more localized form of government. But there are certainly women, typically the women I know who preach are women that have gone to seminary, have gone to an Orthodox seminary and have been given a blessing as part of their seminary education and part of their supervision by their bishop, that they are qualified and capable and given the esteem and the authority to preach. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm
You know the situation in the Coptic Church?
I'm not nearly as familiar. I don't feel like I'm an authority to speak there, but there are deaconesses in the Coptic Church. My understanding is that they operate more the understanding of the orders is a little bit different. And so maybe it's more like a subdiaconate. And the Syriac and the Armenian churches both have orders of deaconess as well.
My name is Soren Hessler. I'm on the faculty at Candler. My appointments in leadership and administration. So delighted with your lecture this evening. My question is more about the pieces that were in place that led up to the ordination and the various conversation partners with the patriarch and how Archdeaconess Angelic decided that she would take on the role of becoming the first deaconess. Certainly, this is not a coincidence. Like there were a series of significant choices that were made, and several conversation partners. And I'd love to hear a little more, particularly from your vantage point at the St. Phoebe Center. I imagine you have at least some insight into the various conversations that lead up to this.
I don't have as much insight as I might like to have, but I will share with you what I do know. Well, so my understanding is that, again, the Synod of Alexandria was already 6 years, 7, 8 years into this process of considering restoring this order, right? And as I understand it, the Metropolitan of Zimbabwe had several women who were candidates in his jurisdiction, and he approached her and said, "You're already doing this work. You're already doing this." This was not, her initiative. That was not her, necessarily feeling a call in quite the way we use that language today. But he said to her, "This is work you're doing. Let's give you the support and authority to do it." And so he then coordinated with the patriarch and received the patriarch's blessing and so forth. Now, my understanding also is that even though, as I said, this was done with like impeccable church order, all the T's were dotted and so forth, or T's were crossed and I's were dotted. There also, at the same time, the Synod of Alexandria did not design a process. Okay, so if we look at the American jurisdictions of Orthodoxy, if I look at the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, there's kind of a process for becoming a deacon. There's kind of a set of categories, and there's certain training one might do. They receive the blessing of their bishop. They have a background check, like all these kind of this process. That was not in place, but now the hope is that that will come about because of this ordination. This ordination has then raised these kind of questions of, well, what exactly do we want this to look like? What should the age be? What should the qualifications will be? And so that's what I'm hearing and what I anticipate to be next.
That's really helpful, and I appreciate the knowledge that the Metropolitan reached out, that the initiative was coming from executive leadership and not necessarily from the deaconess herself. Although I think that would have been great too, but I think that also raises a sign of hopefulness about different ways of being.
I agree. I think it's very kind of interesting and revealing. The other thing I think that's interesting and revealing is when I was there in Zimbabwe with her, I got to spend a few days with her, which was wonderful to get to know her as a human being rather than just this figure. And one of the things I said to her is like, "Do you know what's coming online?" Having been in a public space myself for years, I know what's coming online, and I know what it's like to have your website and your email hacked into, and to have your university technology crew call you and say, there are Russian IPA addresses trying to, I know, I've seen it, right? It's happened to me. But she said to me, when you're worried about your neighbor having enough clean water to drink so they make it through the cholera epidemic of this past winter, what people say on the internet doesn't really matter. And that was it was good for me to hear that. I came home with kind of my perspective ordered about what's actually important.
Thank you.
And so we have another question online. They ask, how have men responded to a woman deacon in the church?
I'm wondering if the question is local. Maybe I'll assume it's local, how local men have responded to her. I'll answer it that way, and then someone can clarify if they would like a different answer. From what I could tell, again, I'm so thankful to be there and be able to have witnessed it, and again, not read about it from afar, tried to understand what was happening from afar, but everyone in her community was just purely delighted, absolutely thrilled. You know, her priest, the deacons at her church, the male readers, the male chanter, the men in the parish, from what I could tell and what they told me and what the priest has communicated to me since then, absolutely delighted. And I think, you know, speaking to this comment about things might happen different locally, I think that's a great, important thing, because I know Orthodox parishes in the United States who would happily receive a deaconess tomorrow and are prepared in the sense that they understand the ministry and they would be willing to support a particular woman in their parish. I also know parishes that wouldn't be, right? But this was done in a local context that was ready and appreciated her and knew her, you know, and were there to support her. So I think that's another way in which the kind of order was all in place here for this to happen very naturally.
You were clearly an invited guest.
I was.
Can you say a word or two also about other observers? Clearly, the leadership of the church was thinking about how this would be communicated out, and I think that you were doing good work in helping explicate what is going on. But who else was there in the
Yeah.
room, and could you say about why, if you know?
Well, I do know that Metropolitan Seraphim invited maybe 20 or so people from around the world to come, scholars, other people that are interested in seeing deaconesses in the church today, or in one way or another interested in the church in Africa. I was the only person that went, and you know, I don't know why that's the case, you know, but I went, and like I said, my oldest daughter Annie went with me, and so we were the only two non-Africans present. We were the only two people that were not from that parish present. So it was, you know, really fascinating in that way. And through lots of conversations with the Metropolitan while I was there, you know, one of my concerns was I don't want to come back from being in Zimbabwe and pretend to be somehow a representative of the Zimbabwean church or of the Orthodox Church in Africa or of the Alexandrian Patriarchate, because I certainly am not. But he was very clear, and so was Deaconess Angelic, that they wanted me to tell what I saw, you know, and the experience and share it with the world. That was very, very clear. I was asked repeatedly to do that. I've done that to the best of my ability and with fear and trembling and prayer.
So we have time for two more questions. And the first one is online. This is from a professor here at Candler School of Theology, Dr. Stefan Losol. One of his theological teachers, a Protestant theologian in the 1980s, believed that the path to ordination of women in the Catholic Church would come via the mediation of the Orthodox in America, which is socially a more liberal society. Now, the first ordination comes from Africa, which in some ways is often considered socially less progressive. How do you explain this perhaps surprising development?
So, you know, I have to tell you, when I heard the word that at first these women were consecrated as deaconesses in Democratic Republic of Congo, even though, you know, this has been something I've studied and thought about and worked on for a long time, I personally was shocked. And I really had to kind of get over myself and get over my own kind of assumptions about how I thought maybe this would happen. And I suppose I had a vision of, you know, an American or Western European white woman becoming the first deaconess, an unquestioned kind of vision of this. And so it was very good for me to get over myself in that way and expand my imagination of what the church is. So I think maybe my answer is best demonstrated by a story. So I was with several Orthodox priests from Africa, from Zimbabwe, and from Kenya a couple of years ago, and someone else came and asked them about this process of renewal of deaconesses in the African church. And this other interlocutor said, well, isn't that just, you know, American progressive ideals being, laid on to the African church. And, the African church insisted to live by American progressive political ideals. And these African priests laughed and they said, "Are you kidding me? Are you so arrogant that you think that your American ideals are what dictate what happens on the ground in the church in Africa?" They just thought it was absurd, this idea that that would even be the case. And their response was, this is based on what's happening in Africa. This is based on the needs that people are seeing there. This is not based on someone else's idea of what is the right way to live out our gendered or sexed bodies. This is about what's actually happening in Africa.
Thank you so much. And the last question of the night is from an online participant named Spiro. Given a groundswell of people coming into Orthodoxy from the outside and a dearth of new Orthodox clergy, would it not be a huge benefit to ordained deaconesses who wish to serve the church in meeting its commission?
I think that's an interesting point, because on the one hand, I think yes, I do. And many people in the Orthodox world are concerned about a clergy shortage that's happening. But on the other hand, this isn't a utilitarian goal here. I believe that for me and the people that I work with, this is about a diaconal spirit. This is about how to live out our mission. It's not necessarily about who's in charge or who has to be up at the front in the church on any given day. It's more about who all of us, the clergy and the lay people, should be, and how we should fully express and live out our Christian witness. So again, yes, sure, I think pragmatically it would be helpful, but I don't think like the real reasons to have deaconesses in the church are about solving a problem, a pragmatic problem of leadership. I think they're about being who we are as Christians in the world.
Excuse me. That's such a beautiful sentiment to end on, and it does give us hope.
Thank you.
So thank you so much to Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost for being here today and for her insightful talk.
My pleasure.
And as we leave tonight, I wanted to just a few last minute things. I wanted to invite you, we have some prayer cards in Greg Hillis's memory, and you're all invited to take one as you leave. It's in this corner of the table. So please grab one as you exit this evening. And then lastly, you all will be receiving in your email a survey. We take those survey results very seriously. We get topic ideas of interest for our lecture, but also for our community work. So look for that and please respond to it. It's very short, 3 questions, but we would greatly appreciate your input. So thank you all so much for coming tonight. God bless and drive safely.